sorry.
That was funny. I thought it was.
That was
Maybe it's reacting.
Remarkable timing.
Our machines are speaking. I mean, the robot apocalypse is upon us. Maybe we'll need Eliyahu to save us from.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Okay, so last time we moved into the Rabbinic period. We saw how our sages looked at the figure of Eliyahu, some of their analysis of what was going on in the stories that we saw in the Tanakh, some of which were similar to the ideas that we had come up with when we were learning them, and others were new and different. Today we're going to look at stories in which Eliyahu appears involved with the rabbis. There don't seem to be that many sort of independent stories where he's an active character, figure, participating in a plot. He just sort of pops up, frequently at the end, to give us some kind of punchline or answer or new twist on whatever's being discussed. So sometimes the Chachamim will be discussing a matter of law or a matter of biblical interpretation, and suddenly, out of nowhere, Eliyahu will show up, and we'll see what happens. So, our first source here is part of a discussion about the laws of prayer. It's in Masechet Brachot, which deals with blessings, prayers, saying Shema, all those kinds of mitzvot. And so Rav Huna says, whoever prays behind a synagogue is called wicked. Kol hamitpalel achorei bet hakneset nikra rasha. Why? He quotes a verse from Tehillim, Saviv v'rsha'im yithalechun. The wicked walk round about. If, instead of joining with your community in the synagogue to pray together, if you decide that you don't want to be with everyone else, and instead of praying with the community, you're going to go outside the shul, to around the building, Rav Huna says, then this pasuk from Tehillim applies to you. You're separating yourself out from the community, you're taking a sort of useless roundabout, and so he therefore applies this verse which says that's a wicked thing to do. Abaye adds a clarification. He says this only applies where he does not turn his face towards the synagogue. But if he does turn his face towards the synagogue, there is no objection to it. So what's the problem? It's not necessarily that you're praying outside the shul and everyone else is inside the shul. It's that you're praying outside the shul and sort of with your back to it. You're sort of showing the community that you don't want to be part of them, and you're going to do your own thing, leave them alone, you're not going to join with them in their prayers, and it's sort of insulting, like when you turn your back to someone and they're trying to talk to you, they're trying to interact with you, they're trying to be friends with you, to work together, and you just turn around, forget them.
What if you're praying at home?
So if you're praying at home, then this wouldn't apply either. But there are other statements from the rabbis of the Talmud that encourage people to pray together with a community, as opposed to just praying by themselves at home. Because for the same reason, that you're sort of separating yourself away from the community as opposed to joining together with them.
And plus, you might not. There might not be 10 men for a minyan.
Mm-hmm. True. Sort of practically, there might not be a minyan if you're not there, but they seem to say that even if there would be a minyan without you, it's always better to daven with the community as opposed to by yourself. So once upon a time, there was a man who prayed behind a synagogue and did not turn his face towards the synagogue. There's some dude who did exactly what Rav Huna and Abaye are saying one should not do. Eliyahu passed by. Halaf Eliyahu. Chaziev. He saw him. He appeared to him in the guise of an Arabian merchant. He said to him, Kado bar kayamt kame marach? Are you standing with your back to your master? And drew his sword and slew him.
Sounds like something Eliyahu would do.
Yes, exactly. Sounds like something Eliyahu would do based on our previous exposure to his techniques of rebuke.
Because he's a zealot.
He is a zealot. He's full of zeal. He is horrified by the idea that someone could diss God in this way by separating from the community and not even facing the shul, facing sort of the focus, the physical focus, locational focus of everyone else's prayers.
Actually,
And that's actually an insult to God, he says.
I mean, if you think about it a little further, it is intentional and malicious, because if the person goes to the synagogue intentionally to demonstrate this, because otherwise if he wanted to pray by himself or whatever, he'd do it at home.
Right.
But the fact that he goes to shul, to the synagogue, and the fact that he turns his back to the synagogue and he picks that spot means that it's malicious and intentional.
Very good
Don't you
point.
think?
Yeah,
Okay.
very good point. But what it's interesting about Eliyahu, he says that he's not insulting the community. He's not just suffering from the community. He's directly insulting God.
Yeah.
He's turning his back not just on his fellows, but against Hashem. And that's so horrible that he draws a sword.
Are you talking that, let's say somebody is in shul, then steps out to talk to somebody else, while they're davening inside. Okay, now how does this play into that?
That wouldn't necessarily be the most polite thing to do, but it doesn't seem. I wouldn't imagine that that would be presented in as much as a sort of like a in your face kind of way, like this is, where you're not being distracted by someone else. This person is, like you said, specifically choosing to be there and not be there. I mean, like the idea of you're talking to Hashem and then you turn aside to chat with your friend is not so respectful in the first place. Unfortunately, we all do this all the time. But
This is an intentional affront.
right,
Yeah.
right,
Slanders.
yeah. So what? I'm wondering a few things about this story. I mean, it's just like a one-line story. It's like they're discussing this topic, and now here we have a story that fits exactly to it.
Now he asks him a question, and he never lets him answer.
Well, I mean, there are two kinds of questions. There's rhetorical questions, and there are questions that you want an answer to.
Okay.
And frequently, when someone is attempting to rebuke someone else, they're really just speaking rhetorically. It's like, how could you do that? Like, you don't really care how it came about, what individual mistakes of judgment were made necessarily. Like, if you're trying to help them and you want them to improve and think about what they're doing and be thoughtful and have forethought and whatever, then okay, then you'd probably phrase it differently. But when someone says, how could you do that? Or what's wrong with you? Or are you standing with your back to the Lord of the universe? Like, doesn't seem that he's really looking for an answer. He appeared to him in the guise of an Arabian merchant, a tayyara.
Why disguised?
Right, why disguise? I mean,
It's a libel on the Arabian merchants. I mean,
right, it's like the Boston Tea Party. It's like, why dress up as someone else if you could just be yourself?
because you're actually bearing false witness on Arabian merchants, or whatever.
Okay, so which leads me to question, if we're gonna sort of dig into this story and use a not just sort of accept it at face value. How do we know that this is Eliyahu himself? What if it is an Arabian merchant who, for some reason, is horribly offended by what this person is doing?
Why would he be offended?
Because it's possible that some sort of religious, what's the term? Protocol could be sort of universal, or at least not limited to within one faith community. Like there's a discussion in the Gemara about burying people on a holiday. And it says, you don't bury people on the first day of Yom Tov, but on the second day, which is really only of rabbinic level, and all the laws are technically a little bit looser, you can have people who aren't Jewish bury the person for you. And then they say, but we're not going to do that because of, if I remember correctly, because this is in the Babylonian Talmud during the time of the Persian Empire, because of what the Zoroastrian priests will say. Because in Zoroastrianism, just like in Judaism, dead bodies, deceased human beings, are the main sort of strongest source of ritual impurity. And Zoroastrians are even more mahmir on impurity than we are, which is why they don't, at least during the time of the Gemara, they wouldn't bury their dead in the ground, because that would defile the ground. And so in some places they would sort of expose the bodies and let them be eaten by birds and stuff like that, in order to not defile the ground or defile the water, defile the fire, anything that any other culture might use to get rid of their deceased. They didn't want to do that because it would impurify those things. And so the Gemara seems to be saying that we could bury our dead through asking other people to do it for us, but if the people who were asking would be horrified by the idea that we are defiling the ground with our dead on our holiday, it's not going to work. So it could be that the idea of insulting God by going to the place of worship, but stepping outside specifically and turning your back on it, could be something that could offend someone else, even if they're not necessarily Jewish. So the question is, another question, sort of the thought experiment, is how do we know this is Eliyahu? Is this a story that someone saw happen and they concluded, who would do such a thing? Like, who would react to this in this extreme way?
Had to be Eliyahu.
Who would suddenly appear out of nowhere when something was wrong to punish this evildoer? Maybe it's Eliyahu. This is sort of a motif that we'll see next time when we get to the folk tales. But how Eliyahu just randomly shows up. Just randomly there. Maybe appearing in different ways to different people at different times. And so like in the story, he's appearing as an Arabian merchant. Is it Eliyahu appearing as an Arabian merchant, or is it an Arabian merchant there who's then identified after the fact, oh, that must have been Eliyahu? I wish I could remember this story that a friend of mine told me about how they had like a flat tire or something, had some car trouble, pulled off on the side of the road, and someone just sort of mysteriously appeared, helped them out, and then disappeared. And they're like, oh, it must have been Eliyahu Hanavi. If I had more details about the story, I would have put it in for next time, but I'll just throw it out there right now. This is a thing that happens. Whether it's physically, literally, historically happening, and it's actually Eliyahu coming back and jumping around the world in all these different guises, maybe, or for some reason we choose to interpret events in that way, associating these strangers with Eliyahu. And so this is sort of a prototype of that, except here we see him acting very much in the way that Eliyahu acts in Sefer Melachim. Okay. Any questions about this story? Okay, so let's move on to the next one. This is also from the Talmud, from Masachet Kiddushin, that talks about marriage, relationships, various types of relationships which are built on monetary transactions also. So once upon a time, Rav Kahana was selling baskets. Would anyone else like to read instead of me?
Sure.
No? Okay.
When a certain matron made immoral demands upon him.
Matron, matronita, which always sounds funny to me because it sounds like a Spanish diminutive.
Yeah, it does.
Like matronita. But so matronita is the word for a Roman woman of power and influence.
Oh, okay.
Some of which were expensive prostitutes. Others of which were women with political connections or other forms of power in the Roman Empire, in that society.
But it doesn't identify her marital status in any way?
No.
Okay.
No. So this matronita is the kind who wants to get Rav Kahana to do things with her.
Said he to her, I will first adorn myself. He thereupon ascended and hurled himself from the roof towards earth, but Eliyahu came and caught him.
Okay. So, right now, just all the action. What happened? The matronita made a proposition to Rav Kahana, who was busy trying to make a living selling baskets. You can sort of imagine him sort of sitting there with his baskets. He's like, baskets for sale, they cost this many, this, whatever. And she's like, hey, you want to make a lot more money, a lot quicker, a lot more fun? And he says, I have to adorn myself. I don't look pretty. Let me go clean up. Let me get ready. And instead of getting ready to do the deed, he
commit suicide.
right, tries to commit
But
suicide.
Suicide is against our religion.
True. There are a number of stories of people committing suicide or attempting to commit suicide in order to avoid the kinds of sins that you would not be allowed to do even at the cost of your life anyway.
So we have to assume he didn't have a choice when she asked him.
Right. Or he was so strongly tempted to go along with it that this was the only way he could fight back.
Okay.
Because that sort of inner conflict does seem to occur in some of these stories. So he throws himself off the roof, and Eliyahu catches him. It doesn't say if Eliyahu is riding the fiery chariot and sort of swooping down, or if Eliyahu is standing at the bottom and catches him when he falls. It doesn't describe it so much. But what does Eliyahu say when he catches Rav Kahana?
You have troubled me to come 400 parasangs, he reproved him.
So 400 parsa is a very, very large distance. Very, very large distance. So Eliyahu says, it's such a bother. Why did you do this? If you hadn't thrown yourself off the roof, I wouldn't have to come here to catch you and come all the way from this symbolically far distance away. It's one of these numbers like 40 days and 40 nights, or 600,000 people. It's one of these symbolic typological numbers, 400 parsa. Such a hassle. I was far, far away, and I have to come save you. But Rav Kahana has an answer.
What caused me to do it, he retorted. Is it not poverty? So Eliyahu gave Rav Kahana a shifa full of denarii.
What are
So a shifa is some kind of, probably some kind of container. Maybe a pouch, maybe a sack, maybe a box or a jug. It's some kind of container, which it's not clear exactly what it is. The commentators discuss what it might be. Dinari are coins. So Eliyahu says, this is such a bother that I had to come so far just to catch you. And what does Rav Kahana's response mean? Like, what does that mean? What's he trying to tell him?
He's making an excuse. He's saying it's because I'm poor.
So what's because he's poor?
What caused me to do it?
If I wasn't there in the market selling baskets instead of maybe praying or studying, I would have been in that situation.
Okay, so if I didn't have to sell baskets to earn a living, if I wasn't so poor, maybe I'm so poor that I was tempted by the offer. Maybe she offered him something that he needed that was an easier living than selling baskets. If I wasn't so poor, I wouldn't have gotten into the situation in the first place. And this would seem to be the point in like an old Eliyahu story where we might expect him to like punch him or something, or say, "Why are you talking back to me? What's wrong with you?" But no, he gives him a container full of money. Here, solve your problem for you. All your problems are because you're poor. Here. Problem solved. Now I don't have to come from 400 parsa away to catch you next time you throw yourself off the roof.
What do we know about Rabbi Kahana? I mean, what led him to this?
I don't know.
State of poverty.
I did not. Right, so he says that it's because he's poor.
What's the greater context of is this just the story appear as...
I should remember this because I looked at it and I cut and pasted it out. Let's look it up here.
Well, the rabbis
he
and
seems
the
a-
scholars were very poor.
He seems
But they
annoyed.
were also they were artisans. They worked. They had all had jobs. They were builders and shoemakers and charcoal burners and trade merchants, blacksmiths. Like they all had jobs like that.
basket makers.
Basket makers. So I guess basket making is not a very lucrative career.
So I mean, he's obviously like annoyed by this. It's like
Which
Yeah.
which of them is annoyed, or both?
Yeah, it's like the genie, you rub the thing and then the genie comes out and he's like in the middle of taking a shower. He's like, "Oh, what do you need now?
Right.
You just interrupted me. I came. You know what I mean? That's what it feels like. It's like, what do you want from me now? Why now? You made me come 400. So he's annoyed. To me, that's the feeling I get is that he's annoyed. All right, here's don't bother me again. Here, kid. Take these denarii and be gone.
Okay. So the context is stories about people who were tempted by sexual sins and escaped from their situations. There's another story here about Rabbi Tzadok, who was propositioned by another matronita, who says, "My heart is weak, and I don't have anything to eat." And then she offers him something not kosher, and they argue about that, and that ends up saving him from the situation. They're like, "Oh, you're not going to eat not kosher food, but you're going to do this," and it's like, "Oh, that's a good idea. I'm not going to do that after all." So that's the context. It's just talking about similar stories about people who were in tough, tempting situations and escaped.
Okay.
And there's a saying here: "Kol habadvar arva liado v'nitzal himenu osin lo nes." Anyone whom the opportunity to violate a sexual prohibition comes to their hand, and they are rescued from it, a miracle is performed for them, which would seem to sort of give the context for this story where he saves himself from the sin by throwing himself off the roof and trying to commit suicide instead. And then the miracle is that, poof, Eliyahu is just dragged there to catch him. And Eliyahu is a little annoyed. So the first story here, we see Eliyahu being really angry, just like we know him. Here he's angry, but he's more just annoyed, bothered, aggravated, but he's there to help. And then he helps even more just to get out of being on call.
It's like in this case, as opposed to like the one prior, he gets there before the affront to God, before it happens, because if it would have happened after, like Pinchas,
Right.
he would have had to take his sword out and
Right.
gotten both. But so it's a different point in the in where the evolution of the sin, the genesis of the sin is, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's why maybe that's why he's okay with this.
Right. His attitude is dependent on what he's seen
Right.
and what's happened, what he's reacting to. Right. And
What
now,
I don't like about it is it just
Yeah.
like it takes the responsibility off the person, like Rav Kahana, and kind of like absconds with his free will. I mean, it's like what I mean. It's like, okay,
Oh.
I'll take over here, and it absolves him in a way, but it's not him.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Although on the other hand, he asserted his free will pretty strongly
Yeah, by trying to
commit
himself.
suicide.
That's true. That's a good point. All right.
And so, I don't know, but Eliyahu now gives him an easier solution.
Yeah. Okay. I'll buy that.
Okay, the next thing we have here is also from the Babylonian Talmud, from Masachet Gittin, which is part of a series of analyses on stories from Shoftim, the book of Judges. And the sages are talking about the story of Pilegesh Bagivah, the last story in the book of Shoftim, about the civil war that erupts between the tribe of Binyamin and the other tribes of Israel over this this violent incident that occurs in one of the Benjaminite towns, which has a number of striking plot similarities to the story of Lot in Sodom, when the visiting angels show up and the people want to abuse them. So let's just look at part of the story to get the context of what they're discussing. So this is Shoftim, chapter 19. Okay, so page page 560 in your Tanachim. Okay. Would anyone like to read the beginning of the story?
Chapter 19?
Yeah.
In those days, when there was no king in Israel, a Levite residing at the other end of the hill country of Ephraim took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. Once his concubine deserted him, leaving him for her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah, and she stayed there a full 4 months. Then her husband set out with an attendant and a pair of donkeys and went after her to woo her and to win her back. She admitted him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he received him warmly. His father-in-law, the girl's father, pressed him, and he stayed with him 3 days. They ate and drank and lodged there. Early in the morning of the fourth day, he started to leave, but the girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Eat something to give you strength, then you can leave." So the two of them sat down and they feasted together. Then the girl's father said to the man, "Won't you stay overnight and enjoy yourself?" The man started to leave, but his father-in-law kept urging him until he turned back and spent the night there. Early in the morning of the fifth day, he was about to leave when the girl's father said, "Come, have a bite." The two of them ate, dawdling until past noon. Then the man, his concubine, and his attendant started to leave.
So let's pause here. So
Okay.
everyone got what's happening? The Pilegesh, the concubine, leaves her husband. She goes back home to her father's house in Beit Lachem. He follows her there, and her father arranges him to be delayed there long enough that they seem to reconcile. And so after a few days, when the husband is ready to leave, the concubine goes with him. Everything seems to be okay so far.
His father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Look, the day is waning towards evening. Do stop for the night. See, the day is declining. Spend the night here and enjoy yourself. You can start early tomorrow on your journey and head for home." But the man refused to stay for the night. He set out and traveled as far as the vicinity of Yebus, that is Yerushalayim. He had with him a pair of laden donkeys, and his concubine was with him. Since they were close to Yebus, and the day was very far spent, the attendant said to his master, "Let us turn aside to this town of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." But his master said to him, "We will not turn aside to a town of aliens who are not of Israel, but will continue to Giva. Come," he said to his attendant, "let us approach one of those places and spend the night either in Giva or in Ramah." So they traveled on, and the sun set when they were near Giva of Benjamin. They turned off there and went in to spend the night in Giva. He went and sat down in the town square, but nobody took them indoors to spend the night. In the evening, an old man came along from his property outside the town. The man hailed from the hill country of Ephraim and resided at Giva, where the townspeople were Benjaminites. He happened to see the wayfarer in the town square. "Where," the old man inquired, "are you going to, and where do you come from?" He replied, "We are traveling from Bethlehem in Judah to the other end of the hill country of Ephraim. That is where I live. I made a journey to Bethlehem of Judah, and now I am on my way to the house of the Lord, and nobody has taken me indoors. We have both bruised straw and feed for our donkeys, and bread and wine for me and your handmaiden, and for the attendant with your servants. We lack nothing." "Rest easy," said the old man. "Let me take care of all your needs. Do not on any account spend the night in the square." And he took him into his house. He mixed fodder for the donkeys. Then they bathed their feet and ate and drank.
Okay, so let's pause. So what's been happening since then? They go on their way, but they're running late. They need a place to stay for the night. The servant says, "Hey, let's stop here in Yevus." The man says, "I don't want to stop there. They're foreigners. They're not Israelites. Can't trust those people. Let's keep on going a little bit more until we get to Giv'ah, which is another city of Bnei Israel in the territory of Benjamin." They get there. They meet this older man who is from Ephraim but now lived in Giv'ah, who invites them to stay with him. Everything seems fine. Okay. Until...
While they were enjoying themselves, the men of the town, a depraved lot...
By the way, depraved here is how they're translating bliya'al, the same term that was used for the false witnesses that Izebel set up to get Navot killed. So these are people who are not restrained by the ways of normal human society, not restrained by morality.
A depraved lot had gathered about the house and were pounding on the door. They called to the aged owner of the house, "Bring out the man who has come into your house, so that we can be intimate with him."
Just like the people in Sodom
They banged
challenging Lot.
The owner of the house went out and said to them, "Please, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Since this man has entered my house, do not perpetrate this outrage. Look, here is my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out to you. Have your pleasure of them. Do what you like with them, but don't do that outrageous thing to this man." But the men would not listen to him, so the man seized his concubine and pushed her out to them. They raped her and abused her all night long until morning, and they let her go when dawn broke. Toward morning, the woman came back, and as it was glowing light, she collapsed at the entrance of the man's house where her husband was. When her husband arose in the morning, he opened the doors of the house and went out to continue his journey, and there was the woman, his concubine, lying at the entrance of the house with her hands on the threshold. "Get up," he said to her, "let us go." But there was no reply, so the man placed her on the donkey and set out for home. When he came home, he picked up a knife, took hold of his concubine, and cut her up limb by limb into 12 parts. He sent them throughout the territory of Israel. And everyone who saw it cried out, "Never had such a thing happened or been seen from the day the Israelites came out of the land of Egypt to this day. Put your mind to this, take counsel, and decide."
Okay. And then all the other tribes gang up against Binyamin because the tribe of Benjamin refuses to hand over the people of the town of Giv'ah. So they stand by their tribe mates. And then all the other tribes gang up against them, say, "Hey, you can't do this." Have a huge civil war. Tribe of Binyamin is decimated, and then they have to figure out how to repopulate them. But basically, there's this crazy scenario where they give her up to the mob outside the door.
Can you? I'm sorry.
Yeah?
Can you just rewind a little bit?
Okay.
So they go to this from that point they go to that second city, the Israel.
Right.
And what actually happens there?
So they're brought home by this older man.
We just appears a guy we don't know who it is.
No, it says he's originally from Ephraim, but
Okay.
he's living in Giv'ah.
Okay.
He brings them home. He treats them very nicely.
Brings him home.
To his
To
To
his
his home
house.
in Giv'ah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I should have
No.
gone over the rest of the story first. Then the townspeople, just like in the story of Lot and Stone, they gather around the house. They say, "Bring out your guest, because we want to violate him." And the old man says, "Don't hurt him."
This is the husband.
No, this
No,
is
the
the
older.
older man, the
No,
host.
The older
They
man
hurt
saying
the
that-
They
man,
want
right.
the husband.
They
They
want
want
the
the
husband.
husband.
Right.
The older man offers them his daughter
Oh, okay.
and the husband's concubine.
Oh, the
that's
two
his-
the two
concubine
women,
is the guy's wife.
Exactly.
but not
So
the man.
what-
So he's protecting the man.
He's protecting the man.
Why is
Exactly.
this
And he's
protecting
sacrificing
man?
the two
So this
women.
is actually
Exactly.
showing the women in a servitude position.
Very much. I mean, everything in this story is bad for women. Everything
Everything in
going
the story
on
is
here is
completely
bad for
politically
women.
incorrect today.
I mean, it's politically incorrect in the sense that it's tragic and horrible,
Yeah,
and like,
for sure.
I mean, like even here, it's not condoning what they're doing.
No.
Part of the whole story of the Book of Shoftim is that it shows how Israelite society is falling apart without central leadership. The refrain of the last few chapters is, in this time there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever they thought was right.
But this
Isha Yashar ben Abi Aseh.
reminds them, the story is like how the Muslims right today treat their wives. I mean,
not all Muslims treat their
no,
wives
but
like
I'm
that.
talking about like in
Even like ISIS?
no, like even Iraq or Iran. Like the women have no powers.
I don't think they would condone this. I don't think they would condone this either.
But you've heard stories where they've killed the women and they've defiled them.
I don't think in most of their societies they would support that.
Mhm.
Like the reason that's so shocking is because they don't like that either. But
So the old man takes the two women and he throws them to the wolves.
right,
Just-
right, and
To the- to
No,
the
he
king.
just throws out the concubine.
Oh, I thought the daughter as well. Just the
I
concubine.
don't think the
No.
dog.
so he
It's the second
offers the
one.
daughter, and then it says the man Haish grabs hold of the concubine and pushes her out. It's
Oh.
not clear whether it's the old man or her husband
Oh,
who
We
gives
don't-
her up.
we don't know who threw. Okay, wow.
Right. I mean, part of the whole treatment of women thing is that earlier in the book of Shoftim, we have the prophet Devorah, who leads the whole people and is a positive female role model of leadership. And so from the time of Devorah until the time of Pilegesh and Givah, everything's fallen apart. And she also lived near this area. So I mean, that's part of the tragedy of the book of Shoftim. So they give her up. And then in the morning, she's lying there at the doorway. And the husband is just like, hey, we're going. Get up. Let's go. It's like, okay, now maybe we understand why she left him in the first place.
Right.
Like, what's going on here? How is this how he treats her?
And he may have really been the one that he may have been.
Right, he may have given her up.
Okay,
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
So he picks her up, throws her on the donkey, takes her home. And I guess she's dead. It doesn't say she's dead, but she seems to be dead because then he sends out her body parts in order to enrage the rest of the nation, to tell them the story of what happened in Givah, how these people treated them, what they did to her, even though he's part of what went wrong there.
So 12 parts for 12
One for each
tribes?
tribe, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so then the next few chapters are about the civil war between everyone else in Binyamin, and they tell the people in Binyamin, hey, your townspeople in Givah, they did this, give them up, and they're like, no, we won't, and they fight it out, they kill each other. It's a very sad end to the book of Shoftim, but it's there to make this point, as the end of Shoftim does, that without central leadership, everything falls apart. Then leading into Shmuel and the stories of King Saul and King David, which also don't necessarily end up so well either, but from the point of view of Shoftim, it's better to have a king.
How's it?
From the point of view of Melachim, it may not be so good to have a king.
How does the Civil War end?
The Civil War ends, they basically kill a large majority of the men in Binyamin.
Oh.
And
In that town or all of Benjamin?
in all of Binyamin, and many of the women. And so the whole tribe is very, very small now, and the other tribes realize, wait, we can't just kill one of our fellow tribes. They need to repopulate their tribe, and so they come up with this strategy to get wives for the remaining men of Binyamin by having them abduct women from this one region where, unlike the rest of the country, they never made this oath that they would never marry these horrible Binyamin people. So they're like, oh, just go abduct women from there.
If you read on,
Yeah.
okay, on the 20 it says, they gathered against me around the house in the night, and they meant to kill me, and they ravaged my concubine until she died.
Right.
So she was dead at the doorstep.
That's what he says.
Yeah.
But the way the story the narrative is told, the narrative voice, it never tells us that she was dead at that point. I mean, it's likely that she was, but not telling us explicitly that makes it more shocking than it says, and then he cut her up. Because we don't seem to be meant to recognize at first, wait, at what point is she dead? Sort of to shock the reader. But when he tells the story, he clearly says she was dead. But it's a horrible story. It's a very sad, tragic, angry end to the book of Shoftim. And the rabbis were discussing what was going on here. What happened? Because in the beginning of the story, she leaves him. And she goes back home to her father. So what is it that happened? So in our translation here, it said that she deserted him. But the literally, the verb used, vatizna, is like it's translated here in the translation of the Gemara, where it says, played the harlot. What's another, sorry, I don't remember. There's another translation of that. Oh no, that's not polite, never mind. But sort of like betrayed sexually. It's the same root as is used for a prostitute. So what does that mean? It doesn't say that she slept with anyone, that she committed adultery. So what happened? So what does this mean? So Rabbi Aviatar said that the Levite, her husband, found a fly with her. Something grossed him out. Maybe she had lice or something, or... and Rabbi Yonatan said that he found a hair on her. Something very trivial. Very trivial, easily dealt with. But it bothered him so much that she's like, okay, listen, I'm leaving. Rabbi Abiatar soon afterwards came across Eliyahu and said to him, "What is the Holy One, blessed be he, doing?" And he answered, he's discussing the question of Pilegesh Bagivah. God is studying the same story that you have been discussing. So what does he say? Okay, so if Hashem is learning the same story, well, what's God's opinion on this matter? So Eliyahu says, oh, what's God saying? God says, oh, my son Eviatar says so-and-so, and my son Yonatan says such and such. So God is presenting the opinions of the sages about what went on in the story. Said Rabbi Aviatar, can there possibly be uncertainty in the mind of the Heavenly One? God doesn't know what happened in the story? We're just theorizing. We're trying to fill in the blanks here. We're trying to use logic to figure out what happened. God doesn't know that already? Why does God have to say, oh, well, this person thinks it was this, this person thinks it was that, and argue it out? God should know the story. God knows what happened. So Eliyahu says, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Both these and that are the words of the living God. You're both right. He found a fly and excused it. He found a hair and did not excuse it. Both of your theories were correct. Just put them together and you find the bigger picture. Sort of like last time when we saw they were talking about what tribe Eliyahu is from. And then Eliyahu appears and says, oh, by the way, the answer is X. But here there's Eliyahu talking about God's view of this story, where God is quoting the different opinions. The people say, but shouldn't God know? And Eliyahu says, no, well, God knows that you're both right.
So he's having a conversation with these two rabbis. So
Eliyahu, so the two rabbis were learning the story.
Okay, where's Eliyahu?
One of them later on bumps into Eliyahu.
Oh, okay.
And then Eliyahu tells him what God was talking about when God was learning the story.
Okay.
There's so many weird things here.
Yeah.
like Rabbi Aviatar is right, first of all. Like, what, God doesn't know?
Right.
God has to be like, okay, it's really cool that God is so loving towards the scholars. That God is saying, well, if I'm learning through the story, I want to quote my children. I want to quote my people. I want to quote the scholars who are analyzing it. But to sort of present it as like, oh, I'm not sure. This one's the... And then the answer is, oh, I guess you're both right. It sort of makes sense to sort of fit it all in together. but it does seem sort of artificial. And they're both the words of the living God. Like, I mean, this is an idea that appears in halachic disputes, where you have some kind of scenario that's never existed before, and you're arguing over how to fit it into the pre-existing categories of the law, how to figure out what laws apply to it or not. There is no 100% proof. And so even if you have to decide in the end, this is the answer, you can still say, potentially, there could be more than one right answer, but we're going to go with this one because it's the most likely or the most convincing. But here we're still talking about something that happened, a seemingly historical event. When Rabbi Aviatan and Rabbi Yonatan presented their ideas, they probably didn't think that they could fit together either. It was mutually exclusive. One of them says, oh, it was this, and one says, oh, it was that. And Eliyahu says, oh, guess what? God says that you're both right. Because they can fit together. Even if you didn't think they could.
It could be that additional evidence has then now proven the fact.
I mean, additional evidence here would just be sort of the testimony of God.
No, like the hair, like let's say a blonde hair or red hair, she's a brunette. Okay, and all of a sudden there's a...
Oh, that kind of hair.
What other hair would you think of?
Like a growth or something, like...
Yeah.
No.
Hair on the body in a place where he didn't expect it or want it.
Okay.
I've actually seen discussions of, like historical discussions of trying to figure out hygiene practices in the Jewish community of the Talmudic period. And part of what they do is reference this story about what people's sort of assumptions were about how people treated their bodies. But it doesn't say that explicitly. We're just trying to figure out what's going on in the story, just like they're trying to figure out what's going on in the story before them. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, here Eliyahu isn't attacking anyone, he's not punishing anyone. He's just sort of opening up a view into what's going on in heaven. And surprisingly enough, what's going on in heaven is reflecting what's going on earth. They're learning the story, God is learning the story. They have these different opinions, God validates both their opinions. And so what could have been just sort of an unanswered question, he answers it by saying, you're both right. It's okay. God agrees with both of you. Which is sort of not really what we've seen him do before, where before it was, you're right, you're wrong, and if you're wrong, you're going to get it. Yeah. Right. It's a new, sort of a new activity for Eliyahu.
So there's no timeline to any of these stories. We don't know when.
No, I mean,
in the narrative of Eliyahu when these happen.
No, these are all happening Eliyahu's appearing to these sages during their lifetime. So we could look up when each of them lived.
Okay. So this was after the chariot of fire.
Yeah, this is long after.
Yeah, long after.
Yeah, because this is the Talmudic period. This is like sometime between the year 200 and the year 600 CE.
So okay.
Yeah, but
so in all these stories, Eliyahu is either something other than human, or reincarnated, or something
old, really old.
Right, like we saw last time, the whole question of did he die?
Right.
He went up to heaven, and then he keeps on coming back, And so what is that?
Or he's a cross-dimensional traveler or something like
Right. So he's definitely
Yeah.
what's the word? Non-temporal.
I like that. All right.
I was gonna say maybe trans-temporal or
Yeah.
counter-temporal. He's non-temporal. He's everywhere and every when.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Not limited by time. It doesn't matter. He just appears.
Did you see Interstellar yet?
I have not, but I'm interested in seeing it.
Yeah.
Is it good?
To
Okay.
relate a little bit to this.
Really? Okay, now I'm very interested in seeing it. Okay, so here we have a similar discussion, except this one is in Masachet Megillah, so it's talking about the Purim story. And so we're discussing Esther's invitation to King Ahasuerus and Haman to come to her party. Our rabbis taught, what was Esther's reason for inviting Haman? Why did she do it? Why invite him to the party? So, Rabbi Eliezer said, she set a trap for him. And then he quotes a verse from Tehillim that seems to present this as a thing you can do to take down the bad guys. Rabbi Yeshua says, she learnt to do so from her father's house, as it says, quoting something else, from Mishlei, from Proverbs, if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. Rabbi Meir said, so that he should not form a conspiracy and rebel. Because Haman was dangerous not just to Esther and the Jews, but to Ahasuerus and the whole piece of the Persian Empire as a whole. Rabbi Yehuda said, so that they should not discover that she was a Jewess. Keep all the sketchy people together. And so she invites Haman and Ahasuerus both to the party. Rabbi Nehemiah said that Israel should not say, we have a sister in the palace, and so should neglect to pray for mercy. Distract the people. She doesn't want the people to give up on their prayers. So she's like, listen, you pray, I'm doing this. This is important, that's important. I have my own plan. Rabbi Yosei said so that he should always be at hand for her. So that he should be there. Maybe she can keep an eye on him. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh said, maybe God will notice and do a miracle for us. Let's put all the eggs in a basket. Get all the important people here, throw them together. Maybe God will notice what's going on and rescue us from this danger. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korha said, she wanted to encourage him so that he may be killed, both he and I. Which I think means that she was considering getting him to come on to her so that Ahasuerus thinks they're having an affair, executes both of them.
But gets rid of the bigger evil.
Exactly. Which puts a whole new spin on the whole story. Rabban Gamliel said, she was concerned that Ahasuerus is a changeable king, hafach fakan, a flip-flopper. She's like, oh, let's get everyone here, bring all these issues to a head right now, so that I can control how Ahasuerus flip-flops, and we'll be able to come out with a good ending to this situation. Rabban Gamliel said, we still require the opinion of Rabbi Elazar Modai, who said she made the king jealous of him and she made the princes jealous of him. So similar to the other idea that she's trying to foment jealousy between Haman and Ahasuerus, so that Ahasuerus will kill Haman. Rabbah said that she was quoting Mishlei again, quoting Proverbs, Lifnei shever gaon, pride goes before destruction. Make him feel important, so he'll make a mistake and fall. Abaye and Rava give the same reason, saying, she said, with their poison I will prepare their feast. All these different ideas. What was Esther doing? Why did she invite Ahasuerus and Haman to this party? Rabbi Bara Buha came across Eliyahu and said to him, "Which of these reasons prompted Esther to act as she did?" He said, "All of them. All of them. All the reasons given by the Tanaim and all the reasons given by the Amorim. All of these sages who were just quoted, the sages of the Mishnah, they're right. The sages of the Gemara, they're right. All of them right. They're all right. Just like the previous story."
It's just like the other story.
Right.
He's going to be passive.
He's what? Sorry?
Going to be passive.
Passive. Meaning that he's not deciding, he's just saying, "Yeah, you're all right." Okay, true. He's just saying, "Yeah, you're all right." Here he doesn't even say like, "Oh, God is agreeing with you." He's just saying, "You're all right." Which on the one hand is sort of weird in that it doesn't seem like a real answer. Like, how could that be? How could that be? They're all right.
Is this period later on in time than in the years when he was a zealous?
Yes, completely. I mean, the stories about his zealotry in Tanakh were much earlier than this. That was like the year -800 or so, -750 maybe. And this is it's unclear when this story is put together because the rabbis mentioned it lived themselves in many different times, but this is somewheres the rabbis quoted here lived between the year 100 and 400 or so. It's hundreds of years later. Eliyahu here is Eliyahu after having been disappeared up to heaven. This is a story about him coming back. And what he's doing, he's saying, "You're all right." He's validating all of their opinions. But I don't know, it feels weird. It's very hard to say, like, "You're all right." She actually thought of all of these. Could be. I mean, they're not necessarily contradictory. Maybe that's what he's trying to teach us. That just like he appears in the other stories to give sort of a lens into heaven, into what's going on with God, here he could be sort of giving a lens into human beings and saying human motivations aren't so clear-cut. Don't think that it has to be one or the other. It could be all of them. All of these motivations, all of these thoughts could have occurred together in Esther's head. And so this question that they have, that they could have just kept on arguing and arguing about without coming to a conclusion, he says, listen, the conclusion is you're all right. All of these answers can fit together. People are complex. And so he's not just sort of opening up a lens into sort of the objective truth of God, what does God say, but he's also sort of opening it up into us as people.
So, depending on any of those scenarios, would the outcome have been different? If you would pick one over another?
Not necessarily,
No,
because all
right.
they're discussing is what was going on in her head when she
Right.
made her plan.
Right.
All the events are the same events.
So why is that significant? If the outcome if the outcome is just one outcome, what does it matter what was going on in her head? If they could all be right.
Right. Oh, okay. So I feel like you're taking this the opposite direction that I was taking it.
Oh, okay.
So you're saying that saying that they're all right could mean that they don't matter.
Right.
Motivation doesn't matter.
Well,
Any of them could be right.
In this case,
It
because the
doesn't-
outcome, because we're looking at it after the fact, so we know what the outcome is.
Okay.
You know, none of the scenarios would have changed the outcome, or would they have? I don't know.
I don't think so because it's all the same story. Like,
Right.
The plot is the same.
Right.
Okay. It's just how you fill in the gaps.
Right. Doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay, so that's a good sort of
I think. I don't know.
opposite tension. Like, is it that they're all right because any of them could be right and it doesn't really matter? Or
Or they all lead to the same conclusion.
right, they all lead to the same conclusion. They could all have occurred at the same time because that's how people are.
This was her plans, just, we contemplated how to do, if I don't do this, I'll do this, I'll do that, or whatever.
Right.
It's all ways the same way.
Yep. Okay, so.
Because
Yep.
there's so many other million scenarios that have to come together for her to get to the initial premise of inviting him to the banquet, whatever that is. I
Right.
mean, it's so vast that only a God could really see it clearly.
Right.
You know, so this is like, but at this point, it doesn't matter. It's all like that. That's the point. That's, I think.
Good. Yeah.
But
It's
where
good.
does the,
By now it doesn't matter.
where does Elijah
any of
come
them
into
could be.
this at all?
Well, he says.
Well, that's the end. He
when talks
says-
to Rabbi, the last rabbi there.
Yeah. Rabbi Barabuha. Rabbi Barabuha.
So it doesn't matter. They're all.
He says they're all right.
The argument is moot.
Right. Eliyahu is much less sort of an active character in the stories as a sort of a plot device. I mean, he just appears at the end and he gives the answer. He's not doing anything. He's just
Giving the solution.
giving the solution, right? Which sometimes seems like not much of a solution, or even
Well, it's
even
just
more
This is just
confusing.
an observation, right?
Right. In the next one, though, he's just. There isn't really much of a story here. But he's talking to one of the sages, Bar-Hehe, who's quoted very few times. He appears in like Pirkei Avot once, but his name barely appears anywhere else. So this is the Bar-Hehe, and others say, no, he was talking to Rabbi Elazar about this. What is the meaning of the verse? Behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tried you in the furnace of affliction. So what does it mean? It teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, went through all the good qualities in order to give them to Israel. And He found only poverty or affliction. The best good quality that God found to give to Am Yisrael was poverty.
Can you just clear up the beginning part for me, because I don't get it? He's saying to Bar-Hehe, Eliyahu speaking, right?
So Eliyahu is speaking, and there it's unclear. The rabbis of the Talmud are disagree about who he was talking to at the time.
Okay.
Did Eliyahu say this to Bar-Hehe, or did Eliyahu say this to Rabbi Elazar?
Okay.
Rabbi Elazar. That's just the sort of the introduction to the quote.
Okay.
And the quote is Eliyahu is explaining this pasuk in Yeshayahu about God refining us like silver in the
Not as silver.
the furnace, right? Not as silver, in the furnace of affliction, of oni, of poverty. And he says that this is the best good quality, the best midah tova that God found to give us. Which we could spend a lot of time trying to analyze. What does this mean? What's the value of affliction? What's that value of pain and struggle? And how is that a better quality than any other gift that God could give us? Like, there's all kinds of philosophy about no pain, no gain, about that. But this is attributed not to one of the sages of the Gemara, but to Eliyahu Hanavi. This is an interpretation that Eliyahu gave to the sages, explaining a verse in a prophet who lived in a generation, like a few generations after him. Like he's quoting Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu lived a few generations after Eliyahu. But Eliyahu is not constrained by time anymore, or place. He can be wherever he wants to be whenever he wants to be. And he says, listen, there's this weird verse in Yeshayahu, and I'm going to explain it to you. This one sort of maybe fits his character a little bit more, though. I'm not sure about this, but it could be. I mean, because in his zealotry, like he understands, or he thinks he understands, affliction. That's his tool that he uses to get people back on the right path. Mm-hmm. So it could be that of all the secrets of interpretation, all the questions that there were about various verses in the Tanakh, this is the one that sort of stuck out to him, that he feels a need to explain to us. Maybe to justify himself. Maybe. But it's a verse from Yeshayahu, and he just appears, and he explains it to the sages.
Well, I'm looking.
Okay, you're looking in the context of Yeshayahu? Okay.
It said, though I know that you are treacherous, that you were called a rebel from birth, and for the sake of my name I control my wrath. To my own glory I am patient with you, and I will not destroy you. See, I refine you, but not as silver. It's on 958.
Right.
I test you in the furnace of affliction, for the sake, my own sake, do I act. Lest my name be dishonored, I will not give my glory to another.
Okay. So God is saying, I know you people fail. You don't do what you're supposed to. But I'm patient with you. And instead of destroying you, I put you through this purification process, this painful purification process. Because I'm not going to give up on you. Which definitely fits the kind of ideas that Eliyahu would be attracted to based on how we've seen him act. There's a lot here that we could discuss, but okay, let's see at least one more of these stories. Okay, the popular story of the oven of Achnai. People like telling the story. People like teaching about the story. Let's just go through it very quickly. Actually, interesting about the story of the oven of Achnai, it appears in a much wider context, and the context is about the prohibition of verbal abuse. The kinds of things that you should not say to people, and the ways you should not hurt people in talking to them.
Lashon hara.
Not lashon hara, ona'at dvarim. Because lashon hara usually is like indirect. Like I tell you something nasty about him, and maybe it'll get back to him and he'll like feel bad. But ona'at dvarim is more so like I tell you something really nasty about you and I hurt you directly. So there's all kinds of interpersonal conflicts going on in this story, in the part before this excerpt, part after this excerpt. people die or almost die from the emotional pain that they're inflicting on each other. There's like storms and or there are all kind of crazy things that are happening because people are not treating each other very well. But how does this whole big fight start? Because they're arguing over a matter of halacha. You take an oven, you cut it into pieces, and then rejoin it with sand between the layers. Rabbi Eliezer says that it is pure, it is not susceptible to ritual impurity, to tum'ah, and everyone else, the other sages, declared it is susceptible. Basically, in order to be susceptible to tum'ah, something has to be a finished object. A utensil, a tool, an oven. But if you take this oven and cut it into pieces and then join it back together, but you're not really joining it together, what is it? So they're arguing. Rabbi Eliezer says it's not really an oven anymore. And the other sages say, no, it is an oven, it works fine. It's a complete object. Okay, so on that day, Rabbi Eliezer brought forward every imaginable argument, but they did not accept them. They were arguing halacha as halacha should be argued, trying to convince each other, and they wouldn't accept Rabbi Eliezer's proofs. And then he said to them, if the halacha agrees with me, let this carob tree prove it. Thereupon the carob tree was torn 100 cubits out of its place. Others say 400 cubits. No proof can be brought from a carob tree, they retorted. We don't care what this harub thinks about the halacha. It's not part of our discussion. He said, if the halacha agrees with me, let the stream of water prove it. So the stream flowed backwards. And they say, no, we're not listening to this magic trick, this miraculous backwards flowing water. That isn't a logical proof. What are you doing? Then he said, if the halacha agrees with me, let the walls of the Beit Midrash prove it. And the walls started to fall. But Rabbi Yoshua said, hello, walls, what's your problem here? Scholars are engaged in a halachic dispute. Why are you getting involved? You're just walls. You're not halachic scholars. Hence they did not fall in honor of Rabbi Yoshua, nor did they resume upright in honor of Rabbi Eliezer. And thus they are still standing. Inclined. So the walls are like...
Kind of halfway.
This. They're bent. The walls of this Beit Midrash are still bent because Rabbi Eliezer told them to drop and Rabbi Yoshua told them to stand still. Again he said to them, if the halacha agrees with me, let it be proved from heaven. He's upping the ante from inanimate objects to the heavens. Whereupon a heavenly voice cried out, why do you dispute with Rabbi Eliezer, seeing that in all manners halacha agrees with him? He's always right, people. Come on. Get with the program. Why are you arguing with him? He's right here. He's right everywhere. But Rabbi Yoshua arose and exclaimed, Lo bashamayim he, quoting from Devarim, Deuteronomy, it is not in heaven. What does this mean? Said Rabbi Yirmiyahu, that the Torah had already been given at Mount Sinai. We pay no attention to a heavenly voice because God long since wrote in the Torah at Mount Sinai, after the majority one must incline. The Torah is a complete system. It includes the rules for solving disputes about what it wants us to do. And so, if you have the Sanhedrin, you vote. You vote. You argue it out, and you vote. Rabbi Eliezer lost the vote. So it doesn't matter if God says, the law really should be according to Rabbi Eliezer, because thousands of years before, God already told us, this is how you determine psak. This is how you resolve your halachic disputes. Mm-hmm. We already have a rule for that, and the rule is vote.
Yeah, so forget executive order.
Right. No. God can't just come in afterwards and say, I'm changing the system. God already gave us the system. The system works. It's fine. This is what God wanted us to do. Which just opens the question of why is God butting in the story in the first place if God told us to not to listen. So Rabbi Natan met Eliyahu and asked him, What did God do in that hour? So what did God do? God laughed, saying, my children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. So God says, listen, Rabbi Eliezer's right all the time. And Rabbi Yeshua says, listen, God, you already gave us the Torah, and I'm going to prove to you from the Torah that you have no place in this discussion. And God says, good job. That's cool, nice. I like how you shut me up. It's like, okay. This is a wonderful story for discussing like the power of the halachic system and of the power that God gave us as people over Torah and how we live our lives through Torah. But in terms of Eliyahu, like Eliyahu really gets the punchline here, the last laugh, as it were. The story goes on later on that I didn't bring you, and it becomes sadder and more angsty as all of these rabbis try to deal with their conflicts with each other in a constructive or not so constructive way. But right now, this is the end where people usually end when they tell this story, when they teach this story, because it ends on a happy note. Eliyahu says, God appreciates the fact that you're holding fast to the system as it is and not giving in to any kind of overwhelming force, even if it comes from God's self. Which is very different than like what we saw before. Before he was like, yeah, God says you're all right. And then, okay, maybe it works. Maybe we can figure out, oh yeah, they're all right. Here he's saying, God gave you the power to decide who's right and who isn't right. And God appreciates the fact that you're using your power properly. I mean, without Eliyahu in the story here, like maybe we wouldn't know. Maybe we might think, maybe Rabbi Eliezer is really right.
You're having two
How
sages
can we-
arguing. Well, you're having two sages who are
Right.
who are renowned, who are arguing their viewpoints.
All right, it's actually more than two, because Rabbi Eliezer versus everyone else, which is why he lost. But without Eliyahu here, maybe we would be left with this doubt, like, wait, maybe Rabbi Eliezer really is right. Maybe everyone else is wrong. How do we know that this application of the principle that it's not in heaven, how do we know that that's true? It changes the whole rules of the game. And so what Eliyahu is doing here, besides sort of giving this part of the story at least a happy ending, is he's giving sort of the divine mandate validation to the decision.
Yeah.
In a way which isn't just, oh yeah, God says, okay, you're right, but is actually sort of emotionally meaningful, saying this makes God happy.
Yeah. In a way, it's a redemption for God. I mean, it's like his children are finally getting it.
Right. It's like when your kids grow up, and you're like, okay, they don't have to listen to me all the time.
They get it.
Because I trust them to do the right thing, even if they disagree.
Right.
And so this is a very different Eliyahu. I mean, in all of these stories, most of them, not the Arab merchant in the behind the synagogue one, but when all these other stories where he's sort of opening up this window into heaven. There's a window into to the objective truth. There's a window into God.
Yeah, but again, the intention between the arguments was to glorify God. It wasn't to rebuke God. So
Right.
In a way, it's not a different Eliyahu. It's just the situation that he's confronted here is different. So,
Right. Okay. True. Good. Sorry.
Right.
I expressed myself
No.
inexactly. No, you're right. It's not. The situation is different, and so we see a different side of
Oh,
him.
we see a different side of him, right?
Right. We don't see much of him. Like, he doesn't have much character here. But his function is very powerful.
He's God's messenger here. I mean, basically, he's telling them, okay, during that hour, God laughed because he was so happy with you guys. So I'm here to tell you that. I was there to witness that.
Right, but notice how in most of these things God doesn't tell Eliyahu to tell people things. People bump into Eliyahu and they're like, oh, by the way, so I know you. You're here. You're there. You went up to heaven. You can be wherever. So you can tell me things that I don't know. You can give me godly information. So they ask him. Like, we don't know how God feels about these things that Eliyahu is teaching everybody. That's not part of the story. But Eliyahu is just sort of this opportunity to have access to divine knowledge that we wouldn't have otherwise. We would just be sort of arguing it out among ourselves. And maybe that works. And it's great, and it's how it should be. But when you can get this sort of behind-the-scenes look at what's going on behind the curtain, especially when it validates our whole process of argumentation and learning and discussion, it's something very significant. Okay, we have a few more minutes. And now we have some plot. It has been taught. Rabbi Yosei says, I was once traveling on the road, and I entered into one of the ruins of Yerushalayim in order to pray. Eliyahu Zachur Latov, Elijah of blessed memory, appeared and waited for me at the door till I finished my prayer. So Rabbi Yosei is traveling. He stops to pray, but he doesn't daven on the road. He goes into one of the ruins of Jerusalem. He must have been traveling through or past Yerushalayim. After I finished my prayer, he said to me, Shalom alecha Rabbi, peace be with you, my master. And I replied, Shalom alecha Rabbi umori, peace be with you, my master and teacher. Of course, he has to one-up the greeting, because this is Eliyahu. Eliyahu was calling him Rabbi. And he said to me, Bini, my son, why did you go into this ruin? So I said, to pray. He said to me, you ought to have prayed on the road. I replied, I feared lest passers-by might interrupt me. He said to me, well then, you should have said an abbreviated prayer. Thus I then learned from him 3 things. One must not go into a ruin. One may say the prayer on the road, and if one does say his prayer on the road, he recites an abbreviated prayer. So now we have halachic guidance being learned from Eliyahu. Eliyahu appears to Rabbi Yosei and teaches him that what he was doing was not the best way to do things. Instead of parking your car and going into the spooky place to daven, just daven in your car, do it quickly. You don't need to say everything. You can shorten it. It's okay. And so he learned these things from Eliyahu. And then he tells us something more. He further said to me, my son, what sound did you hear in this ruin, which you weren't supposed to be in? What did you hear? I heard a divine voice. I heard a divine echo, a bat kol, cooing like a dove and saying, Woe to the children on account of whose sins I destroyed my house and burnt my temple and exiled them among the nations of the world. So while he was trying to daven in this ruin, he heard this mysterious divine echo of God expressing sadness on the fact that our sins caused God to have to punish us. And then Eliyahu says to him, Chayecha v'chaye roshcha, by your life and by your head. Not in this moment alone does it so exclaim, but 3 times each day does it exclaim thus. And more than that, whenever the Israelites go into the synagogues and the schoolhouses, the batei knesiyot batei midrashot, and pray, Yehei Shmei Hagadol Mevorach, may God's great name be blessed, the Holy One, blessed be He, shakes his head and says, Happy is the king who is thus praised in this house. Woe to the father who had to banish his children, and woe to the children who had to be banished from the table of their father. So, Rabbi Yosei heard something in that ruin. Some kind of divine echo of God expressing sadness over having to punish us for our mistakes. And Eliyahu says that's not all. This sort of regret is expressed 3 times each day. Assumably 3 times parallel to the 3 times when we're praying. Because remember, he went in to pray. And whenever we get together and daven and bless the name of God, God expresses 2 contradictory thoughts. One is, how fortunate is God that God is being praised in this way? And on the other hand, how sad is it that God had to punish us, and how sad is it for us that we've been sent away from the Beit HaMikdash.
But what kind of shortened? Okay, I'll give an example. Came back from Israel.
Right.
I was at the airport and wanted to daven shachris. Okay.
Right.
I went into a corner of the waiting room, put on tefillin, so forth and so on.
Right.
But I still did the full shachris thing. Should I have then just put on tefillin, said Shema, and that was it?
So shortened here probably means that in the Shemona Esrei, each paragraph becomes shorter. Like you skip the middle things and you only sort of express the general idea. We generally don't do that anymore. But
so like caravan, like if you're in a caravan praying while you're something like that, like if you're traveling.
There are lots of discussions of what you do when you're traveling, but this is like, that's what they're talking about.
Okay.
This is
So
an issue of traveling.
Okay.
But I mean, what it's describing is probably more like shortening each paragraph of the Amidah, as opposed to skipping whole pieces.
No, like just putting on tefillin, saying Shema, and that would be it.
No, because tefillah, prayer here is the Amidah. It's the Shemona Esrei specifically. But so Eliyahu was teaching him one like halachic material, and once again like giving him and giving us this sort of this lens into God's perspective, which once again is sort of similar to how he expressed himself during his lifetime, but here seems a lot more sympathetic. He's not talking about inflicting punishment here. Here he's talking about the unfortunate consequence of punishment. He's not saying, oh, you deserve it, you're bad. He's saying, listen, it had to be done, but it's sad. It's unfortunate. And at the same time, it's great that we still do have this relationship with God. We still do care when we do get together to pray and daven and praise God. Um, and so, I don't know, he just sort of randomly appears. We're going to see more of this. He just randomly appears. Ever since he gets pulled up to heaven.
No, even before that, though.
Right, even before that also. But now he's not limited by his lifespan. I mean, maybe he wasn't limited by lifespan earlier also if he was Pinchas, right? Right, but he just keeps on coming back. And in these stories, he encounters sages, and he answers their questions, willing to answer their questions, even when their questions involve sort of access to information that human beings normally would not have access to. Views into God's attitudes, views into God's view of reality.
How do other religions portray him?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure. That's a good subject for further
class.
research in another class. Yeah, I'm not sure. I do know that I met someone once who was involved with an interfaith organization that was named after Eliyahu. And I thought it was sort of weird because it doesn't seem like a thing that Elijah would be interested in.
Yeah. Good point.
But they seem to be doing good work at getting human beings to get along with each other. But yeah, unless we meet Eliyahu, we may not get the answers as to what's really going on up there, and what God thinks of all these things going on, what we're doing. But I think we've run over time.
All right.
Okay, so next time we'll see more stories, but more of the folktale stories, where Eliyahu is more of an active character and not just sort of a mysterious revealer of secrets. And we'll try and figure out what's going on with why does he keep coming back? And how is it that he acts so different in these different stories compared to what we saw earlier? Thank you.